June the 23rd, 2016. A nation's destiny was decided by a mere 3% vote differential. Usually, in key democratic houses across the globe, a two-thirds majority is often considered mandatory for votes as key as this one. But the vote for Brexit came across as a hurried exercise, with each UK party's leadership interested in their own future than the future of the nation as a whole. Welcome to the Why in History. I am Ajay Kaul, and today we are talking about Brexit and the politics, economics, and the physics behind United Kingdom's move to pull out of the European Union. In 1957, France, West Germany, Belgium, Italy, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands signed the Treaty of Rome, which established the European Economic Community, or the EEC, which was the predecessor to today's European Union. The key aim of the Economic Community was to foster economic cooperation between various European nations in the wake of World War II. Nations that traded together, it was felt, would be less likely to go to war with each other. The United Kingdom first applied for membership in the EEC in 1963, and at that time, France's President Charles de Gaulle vetoed its application. He felt that the Britons were more likely to be on the side of the Americans than play as a team player with Europe. De Gaulle felt that formally the UK would be in, but actually they would always be with the Americans. The UK finally made it to the club in 1973, but just 2 years later, it was on the verge of backing out again. In 1975, the United Kingdom held a referendum on the question whether they should stay with the European Community or the European Common Market, as it was called at that time. But this time, there was a resounding 67% yes vote, which included most of UK's 68 administrative counties, regions, and Northern Ireland. The Maastricht Treaty of 1993 created the Brussels-based European Union, of which the EEC, renamed simply the European Community, was the main component. The EU was designed to integrate Europe's nations politically and economically, including a united foreign policy, common citizenship rights, and, for most of the member nations, not including the UK, a single currency, the euro. Labour Prime Minister Tony Blair, who won a landslide victory in 1997, was strongly pro-European Union and worked hard to rebuild ties with the rest of Europe while he was in office. But he had his challenges. The mad cow scare of the late 90s ended up with Brussels imposing a ban on British beef, and the ban was only lifted in 1999 after tough restrictions were imposed on beef exports. But France kept its own ban in place for years after that. But it was not just beef that Europe and UK fought over. In the year 2000, after a 27-year-long battle, a victorious verdict from the European Court of Justice in Luxembourg, British chocolate could finally be sold in the rest of Europe. Purists in France, Belgium, Spain, and Italy, among other nations, had argued that only cocoa butter and not vegetable oil should be used when making chocolate. They also thought British-made chocolates, including brands like Mars bars, Kit Kats, and Cadbury's, had far too much milk and wanted it to be labeled as household milk chocolate, or chocolate substitute, or even Vegelate. In 2007, after plans for an official EU constitution collapsed, the member nations finished negotiating the controversial Lisbon Treaty, which gave Brussels broader powers. And then David Cameron came to power in the United Kingdom. And in the interests of protecting Britain's financial sector, he became the first UK Prime Minister to veto an EU treaty in 2011. In early 2013, he gave a much anticipated speech in which he outlined the challenges facing Europe and promised to renegotiate membership in the EU if his Conservative Party won a majority in the next general election. At the same time, support was growing among British voters for the UK Independence Party and its hardline stance against the EU. So, what triggered the Brexit vote in the UK? It's a combination of economics and politics. In 2004, the EU added 8 countries from Eastern Europe, which triggered a wave of immigration, and that strained the public services as well as the economy to some extent. In England and Wales, the share of the foreign-born residents swelled to 13.4% of the population by 2011, which was roughly double the level from 1991. Britain's economy at the time was growing at twice the pace of the Eurozone's, and that was the primary reason that it became so attractive for the migrants. And during the Brexit campaign, Nigel Farage from the UK Independence Party stood in front of a billboard of mostly non-white migrant men, and the message said, "Breaking point, the EU has failed us." So even though he said the vote for Brexit, David Cameron's hope was that the UK would vote Remain rather than exit. But the politics ended up being totally different, and the country was placed second to politics. It was essentially a three-way clash of opinion along party lines. You first had the UK Independence Party, led by Nigel Farage, which was aggressively campaigning against the EU. Then you had the Conservative Party itself, which suffered serious infighting over the topic of EU membership. And then you had the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn, who supported EU membership but could not come together on a common platform to campaign with the Conservative PM, David Cameron. But as the vote drew nearer, it evolved into a personal clash between 3 personalities. David Cameron, the British PM who supported Remain, Jeremy Corbyn, the Labour leader who also supported Remain but refused to share the campaign platform with David Cameron. It was a clear case of self before party or country. And then there was Boris Johnson, ex-mayor of London and part of the Conservative Party, who campaigned extensively for Brexit, and he ended up being termed David Cameron's biggest betrayal. Now, technically, David Cameron was the guy who opened the Brexit can of worms to reduce infighting within the Conservative Party so that he could be the unanimous nominee for the PM's job. He promised that if elected, he would hold an in-out referendum on continued British membership in the EU. But Boris Johnson was the guy who was the best example of self before the country. As recently as January of 2016, he had indicated his preference was to stay in the EU, and he wrote 2 versions of the article that declared which side he would be backing in the referendum when he declared his hand in February. And later, his decision to campaign for leave was a blatant opportunism to propel himself into a leadership status. And the sad part, across all 3 leaders, Cameron, Corbyn, and Johnson, was that none of them had any specifics about impact from either decision. In the end, 51.9% chose leave or exit, whereas 48.1% chose remain. A mere 3.8% differential. But among the 4 distinct regions of the United Kingdom, Northern Ireland and Scotland chose remain, whereas England and Wales chose exit. But a more interesting statistic was that the present and the future chose remain, whereas the past chose exit. Yes, age groups 18 through 44 supported remain, whereas 45 through 65 plus supported exit. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this entire exercise lacked specifics. So the drama was just about starting. Cameron resigned as Prime Minister, leaving it to his successor to figure out the specifics related to the divorce. Theresa May took over as Prime Minister and in March of 2017 sent the official word to EU that the UK wanted out. And that set off a 2-year countdown to March 29, 2019. That would be the date when the United Kingdom would officially leave the European Union. The divorce was always going to be contentious, and the EU and the UK got stuck exactly where they were always going to get stuck: the 310-mile border on the island of Ireland. After the partition of the island of Ireland into Northern and Southern Ireland, the northern region became a battleground with a lot of civilian and militant strife throughout the second half of the 20th century. And the strife was exacerbated by a heavily fortified border between Northern and Southern Ireland. And then the Good Friday Agreement was signed on April 10, 1998, which brought a political resolution to this conflict. The agreement recognized Northern Ireland as a part of the United Kingdom, but it was the open border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland that became an indispensable part of the peace process. And how did the border suddenly open up? Because in 1993, the EU single market came into effect, and that instituted the free movement of goods, people, services, and capital among all EU member states. And this meant that even though Northern Ireland, which was part of the UK, and the Republic of Ireland were two separate countries, border and customs check between the two weren't necessary. So in essence, the EU made an open border practical for both economic and political reasons, and thereby it paved the way for the peace process in Northern Ireland. But with Brexit, even though Northern Ireland voted Remain, since the United Kingdom voted Exit, the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland was going to come back. Meanwhile, with Theresa May in office, March 29, 2019 deadline was approaching fast, and there was still no Brexit deal. And people started making doomsday predictions like backlogs at the borders, food and medicine shortages, currency crash, etc. So how did May deal with this? She sought an extension. She got a 15-day extension to April 12, 2019, but her attempts to renegotiate the Brexit deal continued to fail. And finally, the EU gave her an extension up to October 31st, 2019. In other words, figure your stuff out within 6 months. Donald Tusk, not Donald Trump, who was the president of the European Council, warned Theresa May, please do not waste this time. May tried to make a fourth attempt at pushing a Brexit deal, but once again faced opposition and finally resigned in May of 2019. Yes, May resigned in May. Subsequently, the Conservative Party elected the chief illusionist, Boris Johnson, Prime Minister, who enthusiastically promised that the UK would leave, deal or no deal, on October the 31st, 2019. The next few months were primetime comedy and drama. Boris Johnson moved to renegotiate May's deal. He moved to shut down Parliament, so Parliament couldn't get in his way. The lawmakers rebelled against Johnson and made it law that Johnson had to ask the EU for an extension. Johnson famously said he would rather die in a ditch than do that. Johnson lost his majority in the process. He was asked to go back to the EU and asked for more time. And thousands of people actually asked for a second referendum. Boris Johnson abandoned the dying in a ditch idea and wrote to Brussels for an extension. The EU agreed and gave him until January the 31st, 2020. But in return, he demanded elections. And that gamble paid off spectacularly. He won a majority of 80 seats in the House of Commons, wiping out Labour and ending the careers of plenty of lawmakers who fought him. And the cries for the second referendum ended. The opposition turned inward, and the UK was now leaving in January for sure. So, what has been the economic impact of Brexit? For starters, Britain has been short of custom agents to deal with tens of millions of declarations now needed. The result has been delays in some of its own new border checks, with several deadlines pushed to July of 2022. As expected, the number of Europeans migrating to United Kingdom for work has plunged, and British companies have had to send employees to Paris, Dublin, or Frankfurt. The number of jobs that will be relocated outside of the United Kingdom is still just becoming clear. British businesses have said that they are struggling to fill positions which would have once been filled by EU workers, and that is presenting a risk to Britain's pandemic recovery. Lack of truck drivers, echoed in other countries but exacerbated by Brexit, has caused shortages of a whole range of items. The future of many EU citizens in Britain remains uncertain. More than 2 million have been granted settled status, that is the right to stay indefinitely, but with applications closed, the process has made few provisions for those unable to complete online, or much less for those who don't realize that they need permission to stay somewhere they've lived for decades. In October of 2021, trade in the Eurozone exceeded the pre-COVID December 29 levels by 4%, whereas the UK stagnated at a much lower level. More red tape is part of the problem. The terms of the Brexit deal allowed Britain to avoid higher trade tariffs, but its products now face at least one new non-tariff barrier to enter the EU market. Certificates of inspection, new customs requirements, and a large volume of new paperwork all increase the time and complexity of crossing the border, and as a result, push up the costs of trading. For the UK, the non-tariff barriers are even more problematic than for the EU, because even if the UK signs trade agreements with other countries, it won't be able to offset the lost trade with the EU. A very important lesson learned during the pandemic is the importance of geography. Countries trade primarily with their immediate neighbors. In 2019, 50% of UK imports were sourced from the EU, and 47% of its exports went to the EU. Brexit has had a negative impact on EU as well. The EU lost about 1/6 of its economic power and a far greater share of its foreign and security policy weight with the exit of the United Kingdom, which had a considerable global influence. It leaves a financing gap in the EU that will have to be met in part by higher budget contributions from the remaining 27 states. The day the United Kingdom exited the EU marked the end of more than half a century-long trend towards greater political integration in Europe. And we end this section of the program with a small observation. It is very easy to break something, but a lot of effort is required to keep it safe and intact. On to the quiz section. Question from the previous episode. True or false, the region of Balochistan is spread beyond Pakistan geographically and ethnically. Balochistan is an arid desert and mountainous geographical region in South and Western Asia, and it comprises the Pakistani province of Balochistan, the Iranian province of Sistan and Baluchistan, and the southern areas of Afghanistan, including Nimruz, Helmand, and Kandahar provinces. So the answer is true. The region of Balochistan is spread beyond Pakistan geographically and ethnically. Question for the current episode. After Brexit, what city is emerging as the new financial capital of Europe? Is it A, Frankfurt, B, Amsterdam, C, Geneva, or D, Vienna? One more time. What city is emerging as the new financial capital of Europe post-Brexit? A, Frankfurt, B, Amsterdam, C, Geneva, or D, Vienna? The answer will be provided in the next episode. That's all we have in today's episode. In the next episode, we explore the history of space exploration and the political, economic, and military significance of this effort. Till then, stay safe and keep looking for the why in history.